Jason, welcome home, man. Good to see you on the other side of the screen there again. It's been a while.
It has been a while, Eric. It is awesome to see you, and I think we've been back about 24 hours now, so it's still quite fresh in my mind.
Okay, same time zone though?
Your time zone, but yeah. That adjustment seems to be good. Thanks.
Okay, I forgot about that. Sorry.
It's okay.
Hey, before we get into this episode, I just had a couple of things that were kind of things that happened to me and Laura recently. So recently I did an interview on the Bigger Pockets Money Show, and that's a podcast that I've followed for many years. And so that'll be coming out soon. It's very fun speaking with Scott Trench and Mindy Jensen. And actually, I ended up sharing some numbers there, which I have never shared before. So, yeah, interesting stuff there. And Laura, she's going to be on the Choose FI podcast soon. So that was very cool. Somehow she's always upstaging me. So there's that. But, these have been, that's another big influence on my personal FI journey. And I know you've listened to them for a while too. And so it's kind of fun to be featured on such a big stage. But just in case we have some new viewers, new listeners, just want to kind of bring people up to speed on where we're at. Jason retired in 2020. After hitting FI. I think you hit FI the year before, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yep. And I've just reached FI, my wife and I, in June of this year, which is 2024. And so I guess that technically makes me recreationally employed, which I'm becoming more and more comfortable with. And we've been actually talking a lot about travel lately, as our children are now all in college. And so we just have a lot more freedom to do it. And so you and Lori just returned from this really big trip to South America. And for the first time, you booked a group tour instead of kind of booking it yourself. This is something that Laura and I have considered in the past, but I'm just going to be honest, we had some hesitations about it. So I'm excited to talk to you about this today. I thought since this is all fresh in your mind, that really we should talk through all the kind of pros and cons, all the details of this, which was your 20th anniversary trip to Peru. I want to start by asking you first, how and why did you choose to do a group tour instead of planning it on your own?
So the why part might be easier. Okay. We were thinking we want to do a nice trip, but maybe our anniversary is an opportunity to try something new and not have to do so much planning ourselves. I mean, that's a double-sided coin because like you, we enjoy figuring out all the things we want to see and like doing the legwork to figure out where to stay and everything. But we were like, we've thought about these small group tours before, maybe 10, 12 other people. And, what about going to a part of the world that we don't know so much about, and yet there's a lot to see? Maybe a small tour would be a place to start. And so, we did some Googling. We'd heard some names of companies. There's a couple of really common carriers like Intrepid, and then another one that we came to was G Adventures, who operates a number of different tours, including ones for National Geographic journeys. And so after a little legwork there, we found a 2-week trip to Peru that would see all sorts of sites, and they would do all of the logistics effort and provide all the guides and everything. All we had to do was get to and from Lima, the capital. Okay. So that's how we decided where to go, and the price seemed right, and it seemed to fit a lot of our criteria, and so we booked it probably 4 or 5 months before we left.
Okay, and so you considered a few others. I know when you're looking at these groups, because I've checked them out before too, they can stratify by age. Did you choose one based on that criteria?
No, so G Adventures has a lot of different types of tours. They do have one that's geared for people that are younger. I can't recall off the top of my head. It might be 18 to 39, something like that. So we don't qualify for that and weren't interested in that. And then they also have a couple different levels of tours, like I think it's standard and then premium. And they have a new offering called G Lux. We didn't do that, but we did pick premium. And really the difference there is just the hotels are allegedly better than what they put in the standard level, but otherwise the itineraries were pretty straightforward and similar, and the groups were capped at, I believe it's no more than 12 people. We ended up having a total group size of 9, so just us and 7 other people.
Okay. And this is what I would have done, but I don't know how far you went down this rabbit hole. researching reviews.
Oh gosh, we read so many reviews from every source we could find, not just the cherry-picked ones, of course, on the provider website, but digging into Reddit, and it was pretty clear that a lot of people use these carriers. These and Intrepid and G Adventures just kept coming up. I don't recall where Intrepid started. G Adventure started in Canada, has a lot of worldwide offices now. And the only way we found to choose between the two was honestly just some fine points of the itinerary, because both of them were rated pretty well. I believe both of them have this concept of somebody who stays with you the whole time to coordinate. G Adventures calls that a CEO. I think it's Chief Experience Officer.
God, that's lame.
I didn't come up with it. And their price points were quite similar. And so in the end, they both had really positive reviews, despite our own hesitations. And so we ended up booking with G Adventures because they had the dates and some of the kind of finer points of our itinerary that we were interested in.
Okay. So what were your hesitations going in?
Well,
because I know what mine would be.
Yeah, I think one of the questions we had going in was just how, which is worse, honestly? Like, could you get a really bad group?
Right.
Like, you get some people that just are just dominating and have a bad attitude, or like always in your face asking stuff about your private life, or they never shut up and just keep asking questions of the guide. Or also, like, would we feel so locked into a schedule and, you got to keep going and, not enough time on your own?
Yeah.
Those were definitely two concerns we had. We knew from the itinerary we're going to the places that we were interested in, but like, what would it actually feel like to do this with these other people that we don't know anything about going in?
I mean, group dynamic is number one. It's got to be number one on it. And it's like, and you don't get to choose. And so in that respect, it makes like your experience is going to be completely unique to that one, that one trip. So I would still keep that as a concern, although I'm anxious to hear how that all played out for you. I presume it went well, since you had a good time. But
I think it being a concern is entirely valid because, if you do any kind of group tour, even if, let's say, you have half of your time on your own and half of the time programmed, and I think the ratio would rarely be like that. It'd be more like 75% of your time is programmed with the group and 25% is not. I think it's always valid because you don't know what the group is like. I guess part of you is hoping that people that would do this kind of tour are similarly open-minded. They have a love of travel. They're going to be kind of wired the same. But it's hard to say, well, you can put that completely to bed unless you've just done so many of these tours. And, one of the benefits of the group we had, so there were 3 other couples and a single woman. And all of them were very experienced in taking these smaller group tours. We were the only ones that this was our first time.
Oh, okay.
And so in talking to them, it sounded like the group thing tended to go really well. And a couple of them had even done larger groups, which just makes me hyperventilate, like imagining being with like 50 other people. Like, that just sounds the worst thing ever. And I don't think Lori and I are interested in that, but they did have a lot of experience with Intrepid and some of these other carriers. Yeah. So it didn't sound like that went off the rails too often.
Okay. So I mean, I was going to say, like, one way to kind of protect against that is to go with a larger group, right? Because you can almost kind of fade into the background, but then you also are exposing yourself to potentially more personalities and, maybe more synergies of weird dynamics. And so going smaller suggests it might even be more difficult, right?
It could be, I guess. And, we only had an N of 1, right? And we had a pretty good group. I mean, I think if I had to like nitpick, and Lori and I were doing this exercise this morning, like, there's a couple people that always they take a few more pictures and they just seem to disappear into the background. And then, the leader's got to go find them. But I mean, that's not really a complaint because we all kind of take in trips differently. It was just kind of amusing sometimes. We're like, oh, where'd they go this time? But if that's the worst thing we had to encounter, I think we did okay. There is this idea, and I got this phrasing from Lori, that no matter what you do, you're sharing your vacation with these other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very real.
Even if you have some meals on your own, or you take that kind of time that you have free once you land in a town, but you're not doing a new activity. You could go off on your own, but the rest of the time, these other people are around, and neither of us that typically would be our first choice.
Right.
But I mean, honestly, the conversations were pretty good. It was nice to have somebody to chat with at breakfast if I wanted to, because Lori is not a morning person, i.e. no breakfast. So I'm by myself.
Let me guess, you were waiting for the whole time, every time.
No, I have to be honest, man. She did pretty good with some of those early starts.
She's there? Okay. All right.
She was. Yeah. I mean, a couple times I had to coax her a little bit, but she did a really, really commendable job.
All right. So what do you think the best way to go through this is? Do you want to talk about the positives first and then kind of end with the negatives? And
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that. I think maybe the first positive is super obvious. Honestly, it's just so nice to have somebody take care of the logistics, especially when you're in a country where the language is not your first language.
Yep.
My Spanish has gotten reasonable. I can get around pretty well. Lori, less so, but some. But that doesn't mean that you can navigate every tricky situation. Sure, and to just roll into an airport and have your tickets all ready and not have to worry about anything. And the guide's already told you what you can and can't have in your carry-on versus your checked, which was totally the opposite of the U.S., by the way. So I wouldn't have known that. And just
wait, you can put batteries in the hold?
No, but they didn't want your sunblock or your bug spray in your checked bag. They wanted it for the intra-country when we were flying between two cities in in Peru. Uh-huh. They're like, no, you got to have them in your backpack. I would have guessed the opposite, and it turned out that would have been a problem.
Okay.
So little things like that, but also when you exit Machu Picchu and you're ready to go back, the bus tickets are already in hand. You know where to go for the bus. You're there. We never had to wait when we were having group meals. We just rolled into the restaurant, which had been pre-selected, based on things we wanted to do. And the guide had been there before. And that was really awesome. That's the thing you're signing up for. Yes, you're going to see the sites that you would have figured out how to see anyway, but just the mechanics of getting there, so much easier.
Yeah, leaving that to somebody else to figure out is some people enjoy doing that.
Yep. And
I was going to say, do you think it kind of takes some of the adventure out of it, having someone else do all of that? Because I think for us, at least traveling to, a place that we've never been before, especially where we don't speak the language, some of the challenge of it is navigating those things. And there's a certain satisfaction in doing that. There's also a certain amount of stress that comes along with doing that. So I guess if you're the kind of person who is easily stressed by that and doesn't enjoy that in the end, then this might be a good option to consider.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say typically we do like to, on the positive side, I'd say we like. On the most negative, I would say maybe don't mind figuring that stuff out. I don't need to do it to have a good trip. There's plenty of other opportunity for me for adventure and trying to explain myself in Spanish and get what I want, that I'm totally cool if someone else books my tickets for me. But that's a good point, that if somebody really enjoys that, then having that removed from the picture might not be so attractive.
Yeah, and I guess it's less about tickets than it is about places to eat. It's one of the things I really enjoy about traveling is trying to figure out where we're going to eat. And maybe this will come up later, maybe just having some unprogrammed time in there so that you can still do some of that on the vacation would be important to me if I was going to consider something like this.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you guys eat every meal together?
We didn't, no.
Okay.
So breakfast was always included at the hotel, much like it is in a lot of countries.
Sure.
And so you didn't have to do that, and you certainly didn't have to sit with other people from the group. Lunches were very often, they're not included, but in our travels, there were somewhere we were going to go, occasionally included as part of an activity. And sometimes it was just, hey, are you guys hungry? Do you want to eat? And we would just all be together anyway, so we'd go have lunch together. Dinners were a mix. There were almost none that were set part of the agenda. We're going to do this because it's a cool thing. We're going to go see a show, for example. Most of them, it was, what do you guys feel like? Do you want to get dinner together? And so when Lori and I were thinking about this morning, it was not obligatory to have meals together. Maybe it feels like you're supposed to. Yeah. And so most times we did. Yeah. And we did have some input into what kind of meal we wanted. Sometimes we just wanted something quick. Sometimes we wanted something sit down. But there were a few times where we were like, guys, we're gonna go do our own thing this evening.
Okay. Cool.
We're not feeling it. And nobody was weird about it. And a couple other people did it a few times. But, it was never spoken, but we did have this feeling sometimes is it weird if we choose to go off on our own? And I think we should be emotionally confident enough to know that, like, no, that's not weird. Like, you can totally do that. No one thought ill of us.
I think it's normal to feel those feelings, though, for sure.
Yeah, I think so. There's a dynamic.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. I mean, I think about what it's like traveling with family or a close group of friends, and we all have different tastes. And I think about what that must be like, trying to figure that out amongst people I know versus people that I don't know, where maybe I'm not willing to speak up and say, oh, I don't want this or that. So it is a thing. All right. That's good. Yeah. I appreciate the honesty there.
Hey, no problem. I it's all fresh in my head. I should be being very honest today.
Yep. Okay.
I think something that goes along with the logistics that I know not every tour company has, but G Adventures, it's a big part of their kind of ethos. And yes, I know it has a silly name, but having that CEO was so helpful. So not only is it somebody who is in charge, it's somebody local. So the woman that oversaw our group, she's 32 years old. She's from Lima, has only ever lived in Peru. So she has not only a lot of local knowledge, but local perspective on how things work and history and all that. And so we were able to use her for anything where we needed assistance. If somebody was sick, because it's kind of inevitable you're going to get some kind of GI distress in South America or Central America, as the past has proven out for me and Lori, at least, no matter how careful you are. And that's okay. But, just as simple as, hey, do you want me to go to the pharmacist with you? I'll make sure you get the right stuff,
okay.
What you're looking for.
Yeah,
and, let me know if you have any, existing conditions that the pharmacist should know about. Or, that's going on. Would you like me to call a doctor? Like, we can get you taken care of. And it was just having a single person for all that stuff, arranging your airport transfers but also somebody who was with you the whole time. So, you're developing a relationship and you're getting comfortable. And I found that to be a really appealing aspect. I mean, it seemed at first like, oh, this is just, I don't know, this is like marketing. It's not really going to be that useful. But honestly, it was incredibly useful. We had consistent help the whole time throughout the trip, as well as somebody who we could just kind of we could ask any questions we wanted about the country or about the site we were seeing and just get really fantastic information. So having that go-to person for things as simple as there's something wrong with my hotel room to, I have some real needs that, I could use some support with was pretty cool. And I would definitely advocate if somebody's interested in a tour, the kind that have that point person, I would say to prioritize, looking into those.
Okay, cool. Good advice.
I think the last thing that really is high on the list is just the quality of experience you might have. And, you can always find a guide for some activity. And for some things, it's mandatory, like Machu Picchu. You can't go there without a guide.
Right.
It's just not allowed. And there are myriad guides. They're all along the street. You could just look in TripAdvisor. There's just – but how do you choose, to your point, like reviews and all these things? And we've all done it at some point. We've hired a guide and we've had mixed experiences.
Yep.
Well, the benefit of having a company like this and a point person who's done these trips so many times, they know they know a lot of local guides, and the ones they've enjoyed working with the most are the ones they hire. And the guy we had with us for the entirety of the Sacred Valley, including Machu Picchu, was so knowledgeable, it's kind of ridiculous. He's like, yeah, this is probably my 800th trip to Machu Picchu.
Wow.
And I've done the Inca Trail 200 times. But I mean, he knew everything. He knew the mythology, he knew the history. He talked about how the site has evolved over the last 20 years. And it's really remarkable to have that kind of experience. And we've had guides that good before, and we've had guides that were nowhere near that good before. Right. But I have to be honest, we had probably 4 or at least 4 guides who were with us for 1 to 2 days, depending on the portion of the trip, that our CEO had arranged for, and every one of them was that good.
Okay.
And that was really cool, because for me, and I know you're the same, right?
Yeah.
You're here for cultural immersion. You want to learn, you want to hear the local perspective, what's the good, what's the bad, what's the history. And these men and women were so fantastic at that when it comes to the end, when you're like, oh, I should give them some kind of gratuity, it's never like, oh, here we go, another tip.
Yeah.
No, it's like, these guys are working their tail off and they're doing such a good job and they're so personable. For us, that was a really positive part of the trip, was just how high quality the guidance we got along the way.
I mean,
was.
having a guide that is knowledgeable like that can be transformative. And I know Laura and I, on a recent trip that we took, we had a guide like that, and it's just it turned a place which could have been dull or just a shell of what it was into a place that was just really vibrant and culturally interesting. It set it in context of like world history, and I love that about a good guide. So that's great that you guys had multiple experiences like that.
Did.
And that definitely seems like a value add.
The other thing I was thinking about in terms of high quality experiences was one of the things we really liked about G Adventures is they have an associated charitable arm called Planetera, where they invest in lots of projects that benefit the local communities. One of those that they're not solely but partially supportive of is this kind of, it's called Potato Park, right? The Andes are known for not only being the home of the potato, but having just incredible diversity. And there's 3,000 varieties of potatoes in Peru alone. And there was this park where these people that have their entirety of their familial history in the Andes, and they showed us all of this, how they do their agriculture these days, and we got to taste some of the potatoes there, and it was just such an interesting experience. And we had several other experiences like that where the company was involved in a couple of different local projects, and they took us to see those projects, and we saw things that we probably wouldn't have seen otherwise. Some of them were open to the public, some of them weren't, and so that was just a really nice aspect of the company that we chose to go with the tour operator, because they do have this other mission as part of their kind of foundation. And so that for us gave the experience additional meaning, the trip, and we really enjoyed that. And that was just one example of a few different projects that they had. So that was a nice aspect.
So you guys chose the company because they did that, or?
No, we came across it in reading about our options. I wouldn't say that was the thing that tipped us one way or the other, but it was something that interested us, that they had this aspect of them. And we were really pleased about how they wove it into the tour. It wasn't like a kind of a weird heavy-handed thing.
I was going to say, it could feel a little awkward, right?
Let's pass the hat now. No, it wasn't anything like that. They were just like, hey, we have this relationship with this community. We think it would be cool to show you this, or let's go have lunch at this place that we've helped sponsor for these reasons. Yeah. And that was really cool because, we saw a different aspect of the local culture that we wouldn't have otherwise. So that was a nice piece of it.
I remember we went on a boat tour. We hired a guy for a private boat tour in St. Lucia. We ended up at his uncle's house or something. I mean, it was cool, but it wasn't like the best meal that we ever had. It kind of felt like a pass the hat kind of situation. Yeah. And he's like, on the way back, we went to see his nephews jumping off the cliff, by this little arch, and it was like, hey, well, let's pull up next to these dudes, and it felt like it was a little strange. So I'm generally a little leery of those things, but it sounds like you had a good experience with that.
It was good, and honestly, me being kind of always kind of thinking about worst case, although I have gotten better about that. I think about things like, are we going to go with this guide or this operator just because there's some kickback involved? Right. Like this is somebody's uncle.
Totally.
But it wasn't. Like everybody was super professional. Like we had such great experiences. And at the end of the day, these places succeed or fail based on their reviews. So I guess I shouldn't be too surprised that they actually did the legwork and they really are putting forth the people who they think are the best, experiences for us. But it's nice to see that borne out in reality.
Potato Park, man. I probably would have missed Potato Park.
We really liked Potato Park, man. It was so cool.
Did you guys get the express pass for that?
There was no express pass. I don't think there were any other groups there when we were there. It was just us.
I was gonna say,
it's pretty awesome.
All right, that's cool, man.
Well, it's just like kind of tying a couple of those aspects together that we talked about. So on Lake Titicaca, the highest altitude navigable lake in the world, right? Ridiculous. There's these floating island communities, and that's one of the most interesting cultural aspects of it, is to see these people that literally cut reeds and then float platforms, and they have houses that they build on them, and they've been doing this for many centuries. Now, it's easy for anybody to go to Puno, which is the city near Lake Titicaca, and sign up for a tour of some of these floating islands. But most of those tours go to these islands that are really close to shore, and it's a very touristy experience.
Sure, yeah.
But, this company was like, well, we could go there, we can go here, we can go here. We like to go out there because, yes, it takes us longer to take the boat out there, but we've got a group that we really like that most tourists aren't even aware that they exist. And so you would still get a floating island experience no matter where you went, but we got to see this really nice group of people, and it was a nice, just a couple of hours that, felt special and felt authentic, and we could talk to the people one-on-one, not just with a tour guide, and they, explained to us kind of what their life was like. And I really enjoyed that aspect of it. So it's just kind of another example of that, like what felt like a high quality experience.
Yeah. Why were they so far out? Were they just like antisocial, or what was the deal with that?
It's just where they've lived.
Just where they floated to?
Quite some time. No, the islands don't float. They actually do anchor them.
Oh, they do. Okay.
They do. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. I can't wait to share some of those pictures with you. It's actually really cool.
That's pretty wild. Yeah, man.
Yeah. They do joke about like when they have trouble with somebody, just like taking the saw and cutting their piece of the island off and like pulling the anchors. Like they're actually joking about that. So like, yeah, they end up in Bolivia.
Dude.
Like Titicaca has a portion in Bolivia, and that's where the current goes.
Oh, it's better than lighting the grass hut on fire, I suppose.
Yeah, that's true.
Jeez,
they're probably all pretty strong swimmers.
All right, that's interesting. That's funny, man. I mean, it does speak to this idea of, a group, like what can you get out of a specialized experience? And if it's access to things that you wouldn't normally know existed, I mean, it's hard to assign a value to that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And, but I think, there's no question, for anyone who might be wondering, like if we had gone to Peru for 2 weeks on our own, we would still have a slew of wonderful memories. Sure. And sites, and I'd have these great photos just like I have. But it did feel like there were a number of occasions where it's like, this was just a lot easier than it would have been. Yeah. And we had some nicer experiences, or maybe experiences we wouldn't have had at all.
Right.
This way. And that felt good in hindsight to look back at that.
Yeah.
But it certainly doesn't mean everything was perfect.
All right. So are we ready to get to the negatives, or what?
Let's pivot.
You're usually a very positive guy, so I'm surprised you even have any negatives.
Well, I mean, we wanted to do an honest assessment of kind of how we felt, because do we want to do these kinds of tours again in the future? Right. Was a very real question we started the trip with.
Yeah.
I mean, the first one's probably the most obvious, but it is really worth considering. That is, no matter what, it's going to be lower flexibility than traveling on your own.
Yep.
Even if you have these times that are totally unprogrammed, you can go off on your own and explore. And we had a whole day a couple of times where we could do whatever we wanted.
Okay. How long was the trip, just so I can set that in context of?
Yeah, I believe it's actually 14 days of doing things and exploring. It was 14 or 15. Yeah. And then the bookends were, of course, the flights.
And you had like a day or two, you said?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, if I think about like whole days, like when we returned to the city of Cusco, we ended up having basically a whole day there. And then when we returned to Lima at the end of the trip, we ended up having another whole day there. And then there were also some times where we rolled into town at 3 p.m. for our, before the next day's activities. And there was an option like, hey, do you guys want to walk around? I'll talk to you about the city center, and we can, chill out, and then you guys can go take a nap. And if you want to meet for dinner, we can meet for dinner. But you could have at that time just been like, you know what, we're just feeling like a little time on our own. You can kind of bow out and do that. But there was a bunch of that where, there was nothing scheduled, but you could just do something. And I would say most people, most of the time, chose to stay with the group.
Okay. Yep. God, those guys must have been exhausted. Like the guides.
I mean, yeah. So we talked to her about that, and she's like, "Yeah, it is. It's tiring." Like, she's like, "I have 6 days off or something before my next group, and like I'm just gonna like hang out with my family, and I just need some downtime.
Well, I mean, it's important to think about this, because when I think about, rolling into a town at 3 p.m, and like, that is what I want to do. I want to kick back. Maybe I want to go to a bar or something and just have a drink or two, and just like, but I don't need history in my face like a fire hose, 24/7.
Right.
Neither do you, right?
No, and they were good about that. I think very often they were like, why don't we agree to meet in like 90 minutes? Like, if you guys want to meet and, go to the tour, if you guys want to see the city center, just, show of hands, like, okay, like, let's meet in the lobby in an hour and a half.
Okay. Yeah.
And sometimes people would go take a nap. Sometimes it, whatever.
Yeah.
But there was always an offer of, do you want to do this? Yeah. So, to the flexibility question, there are things that are 100% programmed, and there's no way around it. And some of those would have been that way for you anyway. Like, you have to book an entrance time to Machu Picchu, right?
Yeah,
of course, everybody expects that. But still, there's flights that are booked for you already, intra-country flights. There are activities that are scheduled, and those are immovable. And that could be a problem if, for example, you wake up one day and you're like, man, we've just been going and going and going.
Yeah.
Wouldn't it be nice to just not do anything today? And you have that ability as a traveling on your own. And I'm sure you've taken advantage of that too, right? Yeah. You traveled with family.
Yep.
I'm sure there were times where you slowed down more than you might have chosen otherwise, and you had the ability to do that, right?
Yeah, and you further to that, you can plan the day based on people's waking schedule, or if you're an early morning person or not. You can, and I know that specifically impacts you, right?
It does. I mean, there were days where it was like, look, we have a big travel day. Either we got an early flight or we got a long drive. And there was, one day where there was like a 9 or 10 hour drive, and it was in a nice van, so it was comfortable and we didn't have to do the driving, but still it's like,
that's nice.
We're going to be in the lobby at 6 a.m. And of course, Lori's like, really, 6 a.m.? and she's right. Like, if you were on your own and you had rented a car, or you were going to take a train, there's going to be options.
Yeah.
But in this case, our guide was like, I'm sorry, guys, it's 6 a.m. I know you'd rather sleep in, but trust me that it's going to be better that way. We're going to have less traffic, or, whatever. And you can't change that. So if having those types of things locked in is problematic, that would be a big negative.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense.
I got used to it pretty fast, but it did kind of make me think, like, I like being able to choose, like, hey, man, we've had 4 awesome but fast-paced days in a row. Let's just take a down day.
Yeah. Also, I wouldn't probably not opt for a 9-hour drive in a van full of people. That would be hard for me.
Yeah.
Ooh, how many of those days did you have?
We only had 2 days with a long drive, I would say.
Okay.
Most of the time, we were driving for a few hours or whatever. And quite honestly, it was a nice time to catch a nap.
Yeah.
Or just, kind of read quietly, or, watch something on your iPad.
Did you like run outside and like shotgun?
I did not. On the days of my worst kind of stomach distress, I was like, I would like to sit towards the front of the van, because, man, it gets bouncy in the back on some of those roads.
I can imagine.
And people were cool about that. But yeah.
No porta-johns on the bus?
No porta-johns on the bus. So there were scheduled bathroom stops that were super reasonable, sometimes around a meal, sometimes not. But they were really good about, like, if anybody needed to stop at another time, they're like, make sure you let us know. Don't just suffer.
Yeah, all right.
And that was cool. I mean, they're flexible in that way. It's not like, we have a schedule, we must go.
Yeah. But it's sometimes it's just helpful to talk through the details, because you don't always, if you think about the broad brush of the trip being logistics, getting from here to there, but then you drill down into the specifics, and it's like, oh, I want to spend 9 hours in a bus with 8 other people or whatever it was. That's something to consider.
It is. And, on the same note, I honestly think they did a really good job with the quality of the transportation. The drivers were all good. With rare exception, the hotels were good quality. But I mean, it does bring up another point. Those logistics are 100% out of your control.
Yeah, right.
Right. If you want a room to look a certain way, and it's important for you to do that research. I only want an ensuite bathroom. Of course, these all had ensuite bathrooms, but something that is really important to you. Like, you don't have a choice. They have picked the hotels, and they have a lot of experience. So you're assuming they picked appropriate hotels for the types of groups they have at the right price point. And generally they did good. But I mean, there was one hotel that was like, this one isn't that great. And they told us, like, this is the best in this area, but it's not amazing. You're not going to love it.
Okay.
But you had no choice. And so that stuff's out of your control. Or if you'd rather take a short flight instead of a 10-hour drive.
Yeah.
Like, that's not an option. I mean,
you couldn't meet him?
So that's actually a good question. So we did do something once that was totally off. Like, there was so when we were in Nazca, there was a half day in the morning where there was nothing. And this particular tour didn't include flights over the Nazca lines. Famous archaeological, so I'm sure you know about it. But for any viewers who don't, look up Nazca lines. It's these really cool figures that are kind of scratched into the surface of the ground of animals and other things. Anyway, they don't schedule one, but if you want to, you can do that on your own. But it's not an optional activity, actually. So what you do is you basically sign a waiver that says, I'm going away for 4 hours, and the activity isn't on them, like it's on you, which is totally cool with us. I mean, 7 of the 9 people went, and we had an amazing time flying over the Nazca lines and looking at these sites that you can only see from altitude. And that was really cool, but it wasn't a big deal. And I'm sure we could have literally skipped out on any activity in the same way. Like, we'll meet you in Puno tonight at 6 p.m. when you guys roll in, because, I don't know, we're going to rent a car and go do something else. Yep. You would miss any activities they had that day, and there's no compensation for those, but you kind of just sign out and then you just reappear. So that is worth calling out. I'm glad you referenced that, because I wouldn't have known that was a thing, except for the fact that we asked about flying over the Nazca lines.
Yep. Okay. Cool. Yeah, and basically the subtext of that is like, hey, if you miss the bus, it's on you to catch up.
It's on you to catch up. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
So we started with this pretty early on in our chat about the idea of group dynamics. Yeah. That's certainly a very real and positive negative, to just have the wrong type of people in your group. And then what do you have, right? That's all you got.
Yeah.
You're hoping that your guide will maybe try to, control them a little bit if it's really annoying or they're causing problems. But I mean, who knows? We didn't experience any bad people. The other 7 people on the trip were all cool. None of them were in your face. Some talked more than others, but none of them were like aggro in a way that was unpleasant. I mean, I was pleased, because
if you didn't notice any problems, man, it was you guys that were the problem.
Exactly. I mean, and maybe we were, as the only Americans in the group. We were just typically loud and problematic. But maybe I'll share this video with the group on our WhatsApp channel and see if they agree we were problems.
I'm just kidding. No, I'm sure you weren't the problem, but this is a very real thing that you can't really escape. If you're going on a group tour, there are group dynamics, and those can manifest in different ways. So I'm sure as tour operators, though, they've had to deal with tough situations before, and I'm sure even if it didn't manifest on your trip, I'm sure there's a contingency for it.
I bet there is. Yeah. And we tried to pry that out of our guide, because she was really forthcoming, I think. She'd been with this company for 7 years. She's done ridiculous numbers of tours. She said she's never had a total nightmare guest, but a couple of her colleagues definitely have. But she said she feels pretty fortunate that she's never had just a train wreck of a person in her group, but it does happen.
I keep hoping they like Survivor is going to do one of these tours, and you just could vote out the people you don't like, I guess.
Exactly. Oh man.
All right, cool.
It was. I got to be honest. It was probably my biggest concern going.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure.
And Lori too. I mean, she's more of an introvert. Like, this idea of like having to be on all the time, and are people going to want to talk to you nonstop? That's a real concern.
Yeah, cool. But you guys got along. You had fun. I mean, the goal, I would think, for taking a group trip would be to make new friends and and share a travel experience with others. And that's something that in the early retirement community, you're always looking for a community, right? We're setting ourselves apart just because of our work situation, and so traveling together naturally creates that community.
Yeah, it was nice. And I'm not very good at like introducing myself, to the other parents, like when my kid used to play soccer or whatever, like, I don't know, it's like, it's awkward for me. But honestly, when you have this kind of common ground and you're put in an environment together, like you're gonna manage it and you're gonna talk, and then eventually you're gonna be more friendly with people, and they're very friendly back. So it does make it easy, and it is nice to kind of have the opportunity to talk to different people about their lives, and especially about their thoughts on travel. Some of these people were very well traveled, 10 years maybe older than us, tons of experience, and that was really cool because it's free information from informed sources. And so I did like that. And I do think these types of tours, do largely select for those people because, like I said, 7 of the 9 had done a bunch of these before, to sometimes many trips like this, and we were the only 2 who were first timers. So maybe that's more the norm.
I forget if you were comfortable sharing this, and if you're not, we'll just cut it out. But price wise, where are we at for this?
Yeah. So everything excluding getting to and from Lima, the tour itself was $3,600 per person.
Okay.
And that included, I think it was 15 nights of hotel stays, a number of meals, all the activities like Machu Picchu and things like that. The only thing it didn't include was the optional experiences that we could do, and there were quite a few of those, so there is some flexibility there. You didn't have to choose all of these other things, and then the meals that were not included, and so that was most dinners and most lunches.
Okay, so significant cost. I mean, this was a real cost.
This is not free. But I have to be honest that, after the fact, when we think about all the things we got for that dollar, it seems like a very good value.
Okay. So you feel good about that.
Yeah. And it does differ by country, of course. I mean, and the dollar is very strong relative to the Peruvian sol. So, I mean, it's almost 4 to 1. So, the meals are very inexpensive. Typically, the 2 of us for dinner, we'd pay $25 total.
Oh, wow.
For a meal, including a beer or a glass of wine. So, I mean, the food was quite reasonably priced. The price of the tour was largely about paying for the guides, paying for entry to museums and sites, and, of course, the hotels, and then some of the meals.
Yeah. I was going to say the, price is a natural selector. And obviously we're stratifying for age maybe on some of these tour groups.
Sure.
Price is another factor to consider. And I think if you're concerned about alignment in group dynamics, that's maybe another sort of filter that fits in it.
Well, and the other thing
I'm not making any judgment on that. I'm just saying.
Oh yeah, no.
It definitely, it's going to select for a certain kind of person and maybe someone who's more aligned with you.
You're right. And the other thing I'd say is, hearkening back to something you asked about earlier, there are some age-specific tours. And, when you go to the younger groups, they have more hostels involved. And so you can really get the cost down quite low. And then even for the non-young people groups, which is what we did, there's a standard level and there's a nicer level. And we chose the nicer level. None of these, well, maybe one was like super nice, but they were all very reasonable to I would say pretty good accommodations. They were mostly quiet. They were very clean. The breakfasts were totally reasonable. Like I said, it was really only the one time we were like, this place, we weren't thrilled. The shower was kind of crappy. It wasn't as comfortable. But we also were in an area where there weren't a lot of options. So choosing that tier of service is another way to change the price point that these trips are at.
Do you remember what the next tier up was?
I know they added a luxury level that we didn't try, and it's pretty new to this company. It's their G Lux level, and those are supposed to be very nice properties. I know those are also shorter trips, and they're also more geared towards more active trips as well.
Okay.
The good thing about these operators, and there are quite a few. I've really only mentioned 2 here. They have so many trips, scores to even 100 or more trips, these operators. So you can find a lot of diversity in both the duration, the kind of luxury, but also the overall cost.
Yeah. Was it a surprise? Like you'd show up at a location. It seems like you didn't know what the hotels looked like beforehand. Did they show you like an example of?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you got to see typical accommodations might look like this.
Exactly.
But you didn't know exactly what you were getting.
You didn't. I would say
Okay.
very often the example was the hotel.
Okay. And then
I didn't actually map it out and just say, oh yeah, it's 3/4 of the time, but it was a majority.
So you had some idea. And then the follow-up question to that is, did you know what the activities were going to be beforehand? Yes. Okay. So you knew all of those.
100%. Yeah. There were a couple of, optional things that, were proposed to us that maybe weren't listed as optional activities, but there were some things you could pre-book. Okay. There were optional activities like a cooking class or whatever. But I think nearly all of the activities were described in the itinerary, and you could see that without purchasing the trip.
Okay.
So like they had a lot of detail and a PDF sample itinerary that turned out to be the itinerary.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So it was pretty easy, to your point, to do the research and see like, is this likely the kind of trip I actually want to do?
Okay, that's good. Yeah, that would be important to me. Also, when we're talking extra costs, now I know you flew from a pretty long way away.
We did.
So the airline tickets were outside of this. That's a substantial cost, obviously.
Yeah.
But you're going to have that no matter where you're traveling, right?
Yes.
What other costs were not included in this?
I think the main one in terms of frequency was the non-included meals.
Yep.
But that turned out to be the smallest component of our trip, given the cost of meals.
Yep.
Honestly. They do give you some guidance on tips going in, so you could definitely budget for that. Because you do know there are a number of guides along the way, and then the drivers at traditional give them a little something too. That's another part of the thing you would need to consider in terms of your budget is gratuities.
Okay, gratuities. What about insurance?
Insurance, yeah. So most of these group tours require you to have travel insurance, but quite honestly, it's very inexpensive. I think the policy we got was maybe around $100.
Oh, that's cheap.
And
wow.
Yeah, I think so, or 125. And that included not only medical, but also something they mandate, which is like emergency expatriation costs.
Yes. And it's only 120, 100 bucks?
I think that's right. I'll check that to make sure I didn't make another math error. But I was surprised at how low it was. Now, what is more expensive, if you want a travel insurance policy that covers all possible reasons to cancel your entire trip, those cost more.
Yeah.
In terms of, I can't go at all. So
it's usually a function of what the trip costs,
exactly. And so,
cost of it.
A related point that is a good one, and Lori mentioned this morning, was this idea that, all these carriers have periods of time, just like anything, whether it's a cruise or whatever, where if you cancel before this date, it's 100% reimbursed.
Yeah.
If you cancel after this date, it's 50%, and then it's 0. And so if that concerns you, like, if I have to cancel after, in less than 60 days, I could lose half of my payment, then a bigger travel insurance policy is going to pay for itself, because they're not that much money. Like maybe they're, $400 or something. But that sounds like a lot, but that's not a lot compared to $1,800.
That does not sound like a lot to me, but yeah.
Right.
I think, insurance, the more we travel, the more we're finding that we're relying on insurance, just because there's so many unknowns, man. It just
there is.
If you're traveling to a place where hurricanes are a problem or some other weather event is likely, then that's a bigger consideration. But okay, so you must have had that must have been a pretty bare bones insurance policy.
Yeah, it had, I forget, whatever, there's some amount like, cost, it'll cover $100,000 of cost to get you back to your country if needed for emergency medical. No, it wasn't that bad. So I think it was through Allianz, which is a big carrier, and they have a number of different travel policies. Yep. We made sure we met or exceeded all of the minimums that were specified by the tour company. Okay. But it was very easy to do. We did it all online. You don't need to submit any, medical information or anything. It was super simple. I had my contract with me and had all the contact information, very easy. So that was, I think it's a very good idea, even if it's not required. Yeah. And depending on your risk aversion, you could consider a policy that covers the entire cost of the trip.
I don't know if you've done this math yet, but I presume you will, maybe in the future. But how much more did this cost you by going with a group?
I actually haven't done the math.
Oh, you haven't? Okay.
No, I haven't. I mean, I don't know. Maybe if it's I That's a great question. I mean,
do you think
did
it's
we
a
pay
wash?
more?
I presumed you paid more, but do you think?
Yeah,
it's a wash?
I presume we paid more too, but maybe it's like a 20% upcharge.
Sure. Yep.
Something like that. I mean, it's not like we paid 3 times as much as if we did it on our own. It's just not that way.
Sure.
Unless you're comparing against, like, I stayed in hostels the entire time and I used no guides.
Right.
Which
we're not going to do.
Yeah, we're not. None of the other of us are going to do it, and it's not a fair comparison.
Yeah.
I mean, quite honestly, when you divide by the number of days and what's included, we felt like it was very fair, honestly. And we've seen some other trips from these same carriers in countries that are even lower cost, and we're just like, I don't even understand how this math works.
Right.
Like, this trip is just not expensive relative to what you get. And so, yeah, it depends where you're going, of course, but yeah, we thought it was pretty good. Would
you have, if you didn't book it through this tour group, would you have continued to travel on? Or maybe that just wasn't in the budget or in the plan this time around, but since a lot of the cost of getting to a destination is in the airfare, especially for South America, had you considered extending it? Or
no, and mostly for totally non travel related reasons. It was like, we've got a dog that needs some medical care, and we don't want to board her any longer than we need to at the vet. But you do raise an important point. So one of the questions we were asking ourselves this morning was, would we do this again? And the answer is definitely yes. We would do this again. I think we decided we wouldn't likely do more than 2 weeks. Because they do have 3-week trips, and in some regions, like if you're doing a Southeast Asia trip and you're going to go see Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, it's like, okay, that's a lot of ground to cover. 3 weeks is probably even still not enough, but there are 3-week tours or 30-day tours, and that's really cool. But man, is that a lot of moving around. It's so much moving around and being on schedule. Like, we decided that might be too long for us, and so we did have this thought that taking time before or after the trip on your own, extending in that way, unprogrammed time, we would value a lot. Yeah. And so maybe a 7 to 10 day tour with another whole week or more on your own is really attractive. Yeah. And we only extended by 1 day, but some of the folks who we were there with extended 3 days or 5 days. And that's a nice idea. And so we definitely like that idea of kind of doing a hybrid of doing a tour and then having time on our own.
Yeah. Cool. It sounds like you learned a lot there, man.
We did. I also think it's worth pointing out that, there are parts of the world that are much harder to navigate on your own, sometimes because of language problems, sometimes just because travel logistics are tricky. And these tours are definitely, in our opinion, a really good idea for those types of areas. And we would definitely consider, again, like, it's not a hard thing to, for us to navigate a country like Germany or France or Spain, all countries we visited, and we're very comfortable getting around it on our own, irrespective of not being fluent in any of those languages. It's just a different set of circumstances. In South America and Southeast Asia, it really does help to have that local expertise, strong language skills, just knowing all the ins and outs of a variety of topics. We think tours, for us at least, are a really good option in those areas.
Yeah, I mean, having some cultural insight into how to go to a market and bargain, and just being able to just have that body of knowledge that you might not think about beforehand, but when you get in the situation, you're like, oh, what do I do with this?
Exactly.
That's super helpful. So I could see there's a lot of attraction for this, and I appreciate you sharing all the detail. I'm sure I haven't seen you blog about this, but maybe you'll do a post on your next phases now.
I am. If anyone's interested in seeing more writing and some photos about this, look in the description of this video. I'll definitely write something up and post it.
Yeah, I got to see the photos of the Potato
Park, man. I don't think my photos will hold up to your standard or even Lori's, which are definitely better than mine. But I think it adds a lot of necessary color to
good.
What was a really great trip and just some really stunning places that we got to see.
I mean, Machu Picchu is just top on my list of places to go. How was that? I
it was
can't leave this
amazing.
Conversation without asking you.
It was amazing. And, we've all seen that postcard picture. And by the way, the mountain that's in that picture is not Machu Picchu. That's actually behind the picture, which is what's funny. But, we've all seen those pictures, and it is beautiful to get to those viewpoints and see it. But it's an entirely different thing being there and realizing where this is situated. Uh-huh. And the fact that the Inca were like terrace farming on these ridiculous peaks. And, you can access all of that. And, you can go down into these structures and the ruins and really appreciate what they had built and how little time that place actually existed, because they abandoned it while it was still being built. And so it's just such a different thing to place yourself in that space and see it. It really was quite stunning, and I was really happy to have as many hours as we did there, because the photos don't do it justice. I definitely understand now why it's rightfully on a lot of people's bucket lists, and I suspect many of them don't even appreciate why it's so important to be on their bucket list until they see it.
I always thought that the procession up to that place would be important for me as a way of experiencing it. But how did you get there?
Yeah, so there are really only two ways to get to Machu Picchu. You can hike the Inca Trail, and there's two common variants. There's the traditional 4-day or the more common 1-day. That's the first method. The second method that most people take is they take a bus from a nearby town, which these days is called Machu Picchu Pueblo, but it formerly was called Aguas Calientes. You take a little bus, and 20 minutes later, you're there, because there is a road between that little town and Machu Picchu. We did the latter. We originally had signed up for the former to do the 1-day hike. But I got to tell you, I've been at altitude before, and it's just a different thing to be that high and hike with that kind of elevation. Yeah. It's
and probably that quick. You weren't acclimated, right?
We weren't acclimated. So we decided that, just getting there the day before, and being at 12,000 feet or wherever we were at that point, I forget. The highest we ended up was about 14,000 feet on the trip, but
that's a lot.
Machu Picchu is lower than that. But we didn't opt to do the hike, and originally I did think it was going to be a really important part of me getting to see it. And you do get to see an additional ruins site that is on the way that you don't get to see by taking the bus. But when we were there, we found ourselves really thankful. As we were doing all the stairs that were involved to get to Machu Picchu, even not hiking in, that we were like, we made the right choice for us. Okay. And Lori had rightfully pushed for us to maybe reconsider the hike. But I see why people want to do it. I talked to some people who did it. Only 2 people in our group did it. They enjoyed it, but I don't think we felt cheated in our experience by seeing it the way we did.
Yeah,
it's pretty great.
It's nice to have.
I was worried that I might feel that. I'll be honest. Yeah, I was. I was like, well, maybe it won't feel the same if I didn't hike in, and it'll be just like, oh, this is nice. But it felt pretty great.
Nice, man. That's awesome. All right, man. Well, I'm sure there's going to be lots of stuff in the show notes that you're going to populate there, so people can check that out for the resources that you tapped into, because I know that a lot of research went into this, and a lot of subreddits were read. And cool. Glad you guys are back, and happy again 20th anniversary. I mean,
thanks.
I know it was a few months ago, but
that's all right. We like this idea. We just continue to celebrate our 20th anniversary. Like, we got a nice meal while we were out. We're like, hey, it's our 20th anniversary again.
What will you do for your 50th?
No idea. Hopefully be alive.
Yeah, better be on this side of the dirt.
Better be nice and vertical.
All right, man. Good chatting with you.
Hey, man. Take care of yourself.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
All right. Bye.